Before these last two stories, and we speak to Nonhlanhla Skosana, who's going to try and unpack for us what Gender-Based Violence Awareness Month, Women's Month, whether it's been successful or not. And she's the Education and Mobilisation Unit Manager at Sonke Gender Justice. Nonhlanhla, thanks very much again for joining us. You began by telling us your thoughts and reflections on the month that's been Women's Month, and then sadly having to talk about gender-based violence.
Thank you so much, Peter. It is definitely sad that we really have to sit here instead of celebrating, the efforts of women in terms of making sure that this country is successful, but we are talking about women who have died, but, who were brutally killed. And, we know the story of what happened to her as well. So it is painful. And the fact that this is still continuing in our country, where we are in a space as a country, we now have the National Strategic Plan, and we are trying to come together as government, private sector, and civil society, trying to address the issues of gender-based violence. So it is quite a disturbing issue. And the stories that we've heard are many stories of women in our country where they feel that, more especially the South African police services, are failing them because cases are not really making it to court or becoming successfully so because of the poor investigations of those cases. And that is another trauma that survivors of gender-based violence are going through. And also I just wanted to mention the fact that it is said that we've just heard that 1 out of 5 children are also survivors of gender-based violence in our country. So women and children are not safe in this country, but we need to come together and work towards making sure that South Africa is a safer space for women and children.
Do you think we're making progress in terms of, A, being a bit more aware of this scourge, and as a collective trying to find ways to deal with it?
Unfortunately, because of the number of cases that are coming forth, we seem to be not making any progress, but we would not really undermine the hard work of community organizations that are under-resourced, who are the organizations that are supporting the survivors of gender-based violence by monitoring those cases and also providing psychosocial support, to the survivors of gender-based violence. But we still need to do more especially on the issue of prevention, as in the National Strategic Plan, pillar number 2, that we need to look at how do we make sure that there is social consent in our community where men and women could be able to live peacefully. So, in the meetings that we have regarding the National Strategic Plan, the priority now is to make sure that we focus on prevention, where we make sure that the organizations are more involved on really creating the awareness that is needed, but also engaging men and boys on these issues on how can they be part of the prevention program on gender-based violence.
I mean, violence against women and children is deplorable just as a starting point, but it is a concern that the nature of the brutality and the violence seems to be getting worse.
Yeah, it is a real concern because, when you think of someone who could brutally kill a person and mutilate that person, it is a concern. And this is the kind of an environment that women in South Africa are living in, where they are brutally killed and not only raped. And that is why South Africa is deemed to be one of the most unsafe spaces where women could live, compared to other countries who are at war or in conflict. But South Africa is the most dangerous space for women. Women don't feel even safe in their own homes because when you listen how women are being killed by people who are very close to them. So most of these cases are happening in spaces where women are supposed to feel safe and feel that they occupy those space in a very happy space. But unfortunately, that's where they are brutally killed on a day-to-day basis. We have a very high level of intimate partner violence in our country, and we need to have interventions that really focuses on intimate partner violence issues.
Are these campaigns enough, Nonhlanhla?
Campaigns, Peter, would not be enough unless we see change in terms of our specialization, not especially of men, but also in terms of, as a society, not accepting the very traumatic and toxic masculinity, but also, we've seen the cultural and religious space where there are harmful cultural practices and religious practices that perpetuate gender-based violence. The efforts that are made would never be enough, but we need to make sure that the leadership, in terms of those spaces, is taking accountability, but also making sure that at the local level, we provide resources for the small organizations who are making impact in the community to be able to do their work, because it's challenging to have a community member who's unemployed but very willingly wanting to work towards preventing gender-based violence in the society, but they don't have resources to do this.
Talking about communities, I just wonder, everybody knows what's going on often next door. They see the bruises, they hear the screams. Why haven't we got to a point where, as a community, we put our feet down and say enough and stop those perpetrators as they do those violences?
I think, Peter, what contributes towards that is the normalization of gender inequality, because women in our community are still seen as not, human beings, are still not seen as important members of the community, contribute to the community. So, when you see your next door neighbor beating a woman, you say, no, it is okay, it's because they love this woman, or it's because this man is supposed to take his stand as a man. The very same language that we use when we talk about gender-based violence of saying men need to protect women, it's an incorrect kind of language that we are using, because who are these women protected from? From the very same men that we say they need to protect them. Women need not to be protected. Men need to take responsibility and stop gender-based violence in the community and stop abusing children and women in the families, because these cases, as I've said, and the crime stats tells us that a lot of these cases are happening in families perpetrated by the people that are close to the survivors. So the normalization of violence in our community is an issue, but also the normalization of gender inequalities in our community is a serious issue.
So men are by far the main perpetrators of this kind of violence. And I suppose men have to be part of the solution, A, not doing the violence, but also calling out their fellow males, because they probably have a better opportunity than women to stop it.
Yes, it's true. Men have better ability to be part of the prevention interventions in our community. They need to hold each other accountable. They need to, but there was a program that we did at Sonke Gender Justice, Brothers for Life. We are working with Multi-Pepper Network, which is funded by USAID, to revive that program. And one of the slogans that they had it says, it starts with me. If an individual, as a man, could say, I will not abuse a woman, I would not abuse a child, we would see a change in our community. Until that happens, we will always talk about the community, what is it that they are supposed to do. It has to start with an individual men in our community to say, I am not going to be an abuser, and I'm not going to be part of men who abuses women.
So what can we do together? I mean, we talk about these things, we say the right things, but how do we convert that into action that will make a difference?
I think when we start not keeping quiet in our families, when we are aware of cases of sexual violence that are happening within families, when men in our families would be able to go to the police station and open a case against another man who is a member of their family, because this is more about issues that are happening in our families, open a case against that man and be able to support the survivor and not take decision on behalf of the survivor, but the survivor must have the right to direct how this case is supposed to be dealt with. And we have material as Sonke Gender Justice that empowers men. How can they support the survivors who are survivors of gender-based violence? But it will start with Peter Ndoro, who has a colleague at SABC who is a sexual violence perpetrator, and you taking a stand and coming up front and saying, this is the person, I am opening a case against that person. Because the challenge is that you say we are going to talk about it amongst ourselves, we're going to resolve it as a family, or we're going to resolve it as a company, then we're not going to get rid of this kind of behavior.
All right, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us this evening and sharing your thoughts with us on this very important subject. Thank you so much, Nonhlanhla Skosana.